Today's my topic is experiences and perspectives. So, the real life situation I selected is 2020 Black Lives Matter protest. So it's a protest triggered by the killing of George Floyd, and it was about the video of the white police kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes while Floyd had been repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe." So the meaning of this protest is not limited in the concept of a black being killed by a police, but it's also expanded to the police brutality, racism, and also social justice. So the comments we can find on the internet, and the one I applied is from news networks. So they are split into two different attitudes, one supportive, one against. So from the supportive news networks, we can see that most of them are focusing on the values of the events, and also they talk about the social, historical, and cultural meaning of it. They are suggesting that it is important. They're suggesting the importance of the event. So we're using the idea of absolutism. Absolutism means that we're determining a thing is good or bad by its motive, its action. So from the news here, we can see that they're suggesting that this protest have a good motive. So this is a good event. And the against attitude toward it is that they're focusing on the violence being occurred during the protest. And actually, they're also reporting the crime of the arrested protesters. And also, they applied the damage towards the economies of the nations. So here they're using consequentialism. From the news here, we can see that the concept of consequentialism is that we're determining a thing is good or bad by its consequence. So actually, they're suggesting that all of the consequences are bad, such as the damage, the violence, and the So before we started, here are a few terms need to be clarified. So the first one, perspectives. In my presentation, perspectives means that the ways that individuals view things, depending on their own knowledge and experiences. And shared knowledge, in TLK, it means that knowledge assembled by the group of people. So for example, like the subject we're learning, math and chemistry. So these subjects are the knowledge gathered by the people from centuries ago. And this is a group knowledge and also called shared knowledge. And empiricism, it means that all knowledge is derived from sense experiences. So it suggests that when we're determining one thing, we're like using our own experience. And the rationalism means that when we're thinking about one thing, the opinions and the action should be based on reason and knowledge. So from the two attitudes we've seen, I can suggest that presents the majority of the society. So these two, like supportive and against, are existing in the society. So my knowledge question is that, to what extent personal perspectives are affected by shared knowledge? So this knowledge question will be talking about like how people's perspectives on certain issues are formed, and how people's experience and knowledge can alter their interpretation on events like protesting. So it's basically talking about how the information from outside can affect our ideas. So here's my first claim. So my first claim is that people strongly believe in their own experience. By using empiricism, is saying that considering things with purely personal experience, the information from others will be less considered. So it's more depending on my own memory and the things that I experienced. It's hard to be explained, so here's examples. assuming that I'm a people living near the protest. So I might be affected by the noise and the slogan, the songs, music, and I might be annoyed. And also, I might concern that when I go downstairs, I might be attacked. And if unfortunately I'm attacked or I'm a shopkeeper being robbed, I might have a negative attitude toward this event. And from the other side, if I'm a black who has been treated unfairly by the police, I might be supportive to this event because I want to let others know that black should be treated fairly. So that's my first claim. And the current claim toward this is that experiences are not always considered in the first place. So by using rationalism, which is applying logic in thinking process, evidence are more important than experiences. So for the people that lives far from the protest, they are harder to be influenced by the emotion of the protest, and if they have different cultural, historical background to them, it's harder to understand the meaning of the protest. So their information will be mainly from the medias. Then it will be like the people's perspective will be more rely on how they value things. Like today, if I value intellectual, like the idea of equality, more important than economics of a nation, I might think that the protest is meaningful. So that leads to my second claim. Individuals' perspectives are shaped by the media. So since the only one way, like the outsiders like us, can receive the information of that event is from the media. The source of information is strongly is important to see how the media present these informations. So if the source of information is strongly biased, or part of the information is covered up by the medias, we might have a completely different understanding toward that event, which our opinion will be also upset. For example, like I'm using the one I used before. So these two pictures are all selected from two different news networks. My favorite news networks, which is CNN and Breitbart News. They are really funny. So one is showing a positive attitude toward that protest. So they're saying that is important. The importance of the protest, and also its people. But the other media says that there's a lot of violence and some people get arrested and some robbery. So actually, if people that never know nothing about that event, by seeing just one side, you might accept it. So that goes to my counterclaim. When individuals has already some perspective with that event, it's slightly harder for them to change and accept a new idea. And that includes our first-hand information, but not limited by that. So it can relate it to my first claim, which is our own experience. So it goes to my conclusion. We're saying that the way we produce our perspective, is started from our own values. And the different places is that it goes through experiences or through media, and it turns to our perspectives. For example, if I am a person, I think myself is the most important one. So if I live nearby the protest, the experience might drive me into a negative attitude. So the values doesn't change, but depends on the information we gain, the perspectives will be different. And to link it to other real-life situations. Those situations might be that first-hand information will be different with their second-hand information. For example, Amazon, the forest fire, we knew that. Oh, shoot. Okay, the forest fire. Okay, so for the people, I've heard that they would like those trees get burned, so they get some farms. But for the people who care about environments, they might think that it's bad because we're losing oxygen and trees. And like the Hong Kong protesting, it depends on how you view these things. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Questions?
Okay, I have one. So can you go back to last slide of conclusion? So when you're talking about how individual form his or her own perspective, if you say there are two paths, but what if like both media and experiences are biased? Do you mean that to that extent it's impossible for an individual to use reason or scientific support to form his or her own perspective?
I think a perspective will form, of course, but it will be also biased because their information is limited, right? There's if there's no way for them to reach a correct information, let's say neutral information, their perspective will of course be biased. And does that answer your question?
Okay.
Anybody else?
Okay. Do you think protest is a good way to express people's idea or to fight against something?
I think as I'll say peaceful protest is the correct decision, but when it turns into violence, it's bad.
Yeah, I have a question. Based partly on what Audrey was talking about experiences in the media, and these days we love to see information vetted or fact-checked. And if we see that nice label on the web page or document, wherever we're gaining our source from, it makes us feel good. But it can be argued that everybody's got, comes to the argument or the issue with their own worldview, their own preconceived notions. So my question is, how can we be sure that the fact checkers themselves aren't biased?
To be honest, I think there's no way to check, but there's some signs like the news media. These two medias, one is extremely right-wing and one is more neutral. And the right-wing one is the Breitbart News. So if we knew that this company or this news network has always been biased, then we might not choose to believe their fact checker.
How do we know that they're all not biased? And that's my argument. Everybody's got their own worldview. Even if you say I have no worldview, that's a worldview, right? So how can we be sure that the editors, fact checkers behind that source are also biased? So,
I think only way is through their reputation. But it's hard to know that.
It's difficult. There's no clear answer. But something to think about. Okay.
Would you mind going back to the slide on the real life situation with the consequentialism?
Wait. You want to read the news?
No. You were saying that the protests resulted in a greater emphasis on violence and caused a lot of crime. But I think the protest essentially is trying to fight back against the crime and violence and injustice. So I'm not sure whether using consequentialism would justify the statement that this Black Lives Matter protest is not justified, because I think the benefits brought by the consequence is greater than the negative impact.
So it depends on the way people view that, or it's actually, so this news resort is spread by news, and there are supporters of Trump and don't want make a lot of bad things happen in in Trump's course of office. So actually, they're already viewing this event negatively, and they want to spread this attitude to everyone who have read their news. So they're actually exaggerating their negative consequences to show that the negative consequences is greater than the good consequences.
Okay. Thank you, Bentham.
My name is Jeff from Brazil. I'm just going to go into my real life situation. So mine is happening in Taiwan in 2013. A semiconductor company called Advanced Semiconductor Engineering was found that one of its factories called K7 was discharging sewage into the river in Kaohsiung. It's a province in Taiwan, by the way. After investigation, it was fined NT dollars of 600,000, and it's also shown in US dollars, and it cost 7.5 billion NT dollars, 25 million US dollars to build the proper facilities so it can reopen. So after investigation, the government asked the company to make some improvement to their factory so that they can reopen it. And the issues surrounding about business unethical decision and action and the harm to environment, the punishment using law as a judgment from the government, and improvement as a cost of building proper facilities. Also, effect on reputation, as the issue is then reported by the media and is known by all the society in Taiwan. And finally, attention, as I said, attention of the society. And that leads to my knowledge question, as in what ways can ethics be affected in business in real life? To start with, I'm going to provide several definitions of ethics I found online. So moral principles and basically all of them just leading towards a conclusion of ethics is all about the principles of individual when he or she is interacting with other people. And before I made my first claim, I'm considering about utilitarianism theory, and it is a family of normative ethical theories that prescribe action that maximize happiness and well-being for all affected individuals. And this is what an ethical decision in a company we should consider about. So people in a company would consider the problem from the perspective of profit, the harm, and the loss. So I'll just go into my claim first. So my first claim is with the temptation of short-term profit, the unethical decision becomes ethical for the decision maker in a company as long as the harm are ignored. And one example is that one McDonald's store in Taiwan didn't follow the SOP with the use of edible oil. So with action, they are able to reduce the short-term cost in daily running, in daily operation. But for my counterclaim, we should bring in the existence of law that ensures the standards for judgment on the issue around ethics. So when we learn about ethics, the question we made on ethics is basically there is no right and wrong answer. And in my claim, that's why a law exists, because the expertise made law to ensure that we have principles in the area that everyone has different principles about their own ethical choice. So that's why law exists. And government has the power and obligation to pick out the illegal action, and it increases the risk of the unethical decision. So as a result, hopefully it will stop the company from doing unethical action. And the next comparison I consider is between personal knowledge and shared knowledge. And personal knowledge is about knowledge we gain through our personal experiences or the cultures we've grown up with or religions we live. And shared knowledge, like I can just say, is knowledge that we all agree with. The most common one is subject knowledge. My second claim is that emotion and belief from personal knowledge can override the shared knowledge due to significant reasons. And here I say significant reasons because it is really subjective, that depends on each of the situations. Therefore, an ethical decision is made. And the example I have is again made by Taiwanese called devotion. Involves political means in the scene of the game. And here we are not going to judge whether it's right or wrong, but from the perspective of China government, it's an unrespectful action to do in terms of putting the means in a game that is going to sell in China. So as a result, it's finally banned in Chinese market. And the counterclaim for that is also a case is now known and discussed by other people in the society. Personal knowledge has measurable effect. For example, Nintendo has apologized for the hardware problems on the controllers of one of its products, since of its customer complained about it, and the discussion was so big that I don't think it's brought into the court, but it's close to get with it. And finally, my conclusion is that the question is really dealing with the factors of profit, legal sanction, and shared knowledge owned by the society. And short-term profit has almost no effect when shared knowledge and law is considered the most important thing to protect all of our rights. And back to my original iOS, in the case that the unethical decision is made since it requires extra steps and cost to build an appropriate system for discharging sewage. So the engineers decided to hide the fact from doing like less steps, but less steps and less cost, but the government won't find it until they observe the color of the river is wrong, like I showed in the second page of the picture. And this is some real life situation I found online. One is that is dealing with ethics. The first one is privacy issue done by Facebook, and the other one is one of the 3M products that involve carcinogen in the product. I think it's one of its products. And for someone who don't know that word, it's the ingredient that will cause cancer. Okay, thank you for listening.
Any questions? I have a question. What would you say to a law in one country? What would you say to the veracity of, or the truthfulness of a law in one country, say against illegal dumping, certain chemicals, that doesn't exist in another country? Would that, in other words, would that be a good law? Is that justified? So for another example, oftentimes in my own country, in the US, you'll see labels. So labels in a state outside of California that say, in the state of California, this has been known to cause cancer, this product. And sometimes, I scratch my head saying, well, okay, so it doesn't cause cancer in this state. What do you think about the truthfulness of that law as it is applied in that area, country or state, versus another area where it doesn't exist? Is it a good law? What does it mean for A, is it a good law? B, what does that mean for the product itself?
Before directly answer your question, I want to add something. So actually, after this event, Taiwanese government changed the law that is broken, because there's actually some caution in it. So they improved it after this happens, and that relates to kind of relates to your question. I think we can talk it from like shared knowledge. So even we say shared knowledge is the knowledge that all of the people agree with, but does that mean it's always like the truth or always the right thing? That's kind of your question. And I think we can relate that to like science. So even though like the knowledge we learn right now is kind of like a fixed knowledge that throughout the hundreds of years like the expertise all agrees on, but after we going deeper, like each product, each technology, there's always a gray area that the error is still cannot be ensured. That like the reason of the error happens, we still don't know why. So that's why ethics comes in. As in ethics, we can't really say there's a right or wrong answer. So in your example, in California, it's stated as a cancer causing product, then it's a shared knowledge agreed by the expertise in California that the product should follow the rules in that state, but in California, but other states, because they don't mention it. So the product don't need to follow the rule, but that doesn't mean the product won't cause any damage to the human body. But if that prevents, like other provinces, haven't or yet have the agreement on would that really cause cancer? Like behind it, there's kind of like manufacturers of it, but like my point in general is the statement we make or the argument we make or the rule we make right now, it's gonna change through time, through more things is more information or more investigation or more data we gain that would change our result as arguments made through a lot of evidences. So the provinces that haven't said this product is prohibited might because of this lack of information or not all the people is convinced, and that also relates back to how shared knowledge is formed. So and it's a lot of things to talk about, because we can also talk about the government's point of view that they want to protect most people's rights. But in real life, you can't serve everyone that equal, actually. You have to give up something as you gain something. In this case, you want to protect your citizens' healthy, you have to give up the growth in the market, in this case.
All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right. We have one more presenter, but just a caveat: we may go over time, so you have to leave. I suppose you're welcome. I can't hold you, but you're also welcome to stay.
You couldn't ask any questions?
I'm Audrey Ingrid, and today I'm going to talk about personal knowledge versus the shared knowledge. So first, I'm going to introduce my real-life situation. So in this time, I picked up a speech carried on by the Greta Thunberg in 2019 for the United Nations. And for Greta Thunberg, she is a 16-year-old girl when she was doing the speech at that time, and she comes from Switzerland, and she is also an environmental activist. So for her presentation, her speech is basically about expressing angers of teenagers and condemning the political leaders of ineffectiveness attitude and actions towards solving the environmental problems. So now I'm going to share this speech with you, the part of the speech.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Okay, so basically from this clip that I just played off, I generate my research and knowledge question, which is to what extent emotion compared with reason more efficient in transforming personal knowledge into the shared knowledge. So about this speech, we can say obviously it's really emotional. That Greta Thunberg used a lot of emotional words and sentences like "how dare you" and like "we're watching you." However, on the contrary, compared to the emotional expression, she actually used limited factual data about what government really does and about the justifications of why ecosystems are collapsing and why ecosystem is so important to every human beings. So overall, we can say that even though she is only used emotion compared to the reason, she still inspired a lot of people and gained recognition from a lot of people. Like some of the pictures that I show here are some of the photos I cut from the Twitter, and those people all expressed how agree they are towards Greta Thunberg. So then, before I really start my content, I'm going to define some key terms. The first is about personal knowledge. So the personal knowledge is about what do I know. Basically, it includes one's feelings and emotions, as well as unique knowledge that one has already constructed as a result of the detailed exploration into an aspect of existing LOK. And shared knowledge, on the contrary, is about what do we know. So there are the shared consensus that are agreed by most of people, or at least a group of people who have the same identity. And the emotion at this time means that linking with human personal experience and relate to the everything that we do and the feelings we generated. And reason, on the other hand, means that working with logic. So it goes beyond using the sense perception, but it identifies the scientific support behind some the claims. Okay, my first claim is about emotion-based are more likely to raise people's sense of identity, which makes people accept the claims and arguments. And at this time, I'm going to use AOK of human science and WK of emotion. So what I'm trying to convey here is that by using the emotion, it actually invokes system 1 thinking, which means that this instantaneous thinking and reaction, which is driven by instinct or the prior knowledge. So even though the audience may feel really sympathetic toward the speaker and thus naturally accept one's opinion and perspective. So here I use the example of 2016 presidential election in the United States. So at that time, the Trump administration really utilized the anger and fear. Even though in the 2016 and the years before, the economy in the United States is recovering, and every classes in America is benefit, like both upper class, middle class, as well as the bottom classes. However, because of the country is getting more diverse, like the used dominant majority, the Christian white, are getting less, and the President Obama is a black president, as well as there's the deeper partisanship, which being linked with the political aspects. So Americans are being threatened, that they feel they're threatened. So everyone is really fear and anger that every group is being afraid of lose something, and even though such loss can be both tangible and symbolic, and even though those losses are just possibilities, even didn't turn into the truth, but they're still being afraid and angry. So this time, President Donald Trump utilized such emotion in everyone, and in his speech, he repeatedly talks about "Let American Great Again," and thus to convey his emotion toward his target audience. So, such emotion is being evoked in the white Americans and help the president to promote the protectionism and nationalism ideology and gain support from a lot of majorities. So at this time, the President Donald Trump's personal idea is really effectively conveyed to the public, and that his target audience accepts such personal idea and convey it into the shared knowledge. However, for the counterclaim, I will argue that the requirement of the similar background, the culture limits the range of application of transforming the personal knowledge into the shared knowledge by using the emotion. So it's how culture relativism suggests that to understand one's need to within his or her own culture, which means that the culture will reflect people with different identity, and the people from different culture have different ideas, values, beliefs, and even practices. So it will be almost impossible to impose a entirely new ideology to someone who has already adopted and been used to his own original ideology. So at this time, emotion losses its intact. However, personal knowledge is still able to transform and accept as the shared knowledge, but in the world of scientific and by using reason. So for example, we can say that in this picture, it's a really famous picture about the Selvig conference. So this is the conference that launched in 1927, and the people here are from different backgrounds, but they are all really famous physics and chemistry scientists. So here we can say there are Albert Einstein, who was born in Germany, Marie Curie, who was a French of Polish descent. But however, in front of science, even though they have different cultural background, even though they have different growing experience, they can still communicate effectively with each other by using the language of math with the scientific support behind their theories. So at this time, the personal knowledge can still be transformed into the shared knowledge. So for the second claim, I claim that emotion can simplify complex ideas and theories and allow audience to understand and accept one claim more easily. So nowadays, with the technology innovation and globalization, new ideas and products are generating, and there are emerging business campaigns and social movements. So in order to spread one idea effectively, the businessman usually use a strategy called emotional appeals. So emotional appeal means that using pathos to make the audience support the speaker's argument. By using emotional appeal, it amplifies a feature, the specific feature of a product, and to let the people care about the potential result it can bring. However, instead of let audience to judge whether there is scientific support behind such idea or the product. So for example, I will use a really hot topic, which is hair loss in today's society as the example. So since people's pressure is growing nowadays, a lot of people have the concern about their hair. So at this time, there's really a lot of products about to prevent hair loss or even to regrow your hair, and there's a lot of advertisements about that. However, when you're seeing these advertisements, it's really surprised to find that there is no actually one advertisement that's gonna display the reason behind why this product can stop your hair loss or even can grow your hair loss, can regrow your hair. But what they're gonna display is using the emotional language and pictures the picture of comparison between like before use the product and after use the product. So by using these emotional strategies, the product is really useful. This claim can be embedded into everyone's mind and let people accept that. So at this time, the emotional appeal is being used, and the personal knowledge about the product is good is transformed from the seller's mind into public's mind and being into the shared public knowledge. However, I will still fight back to this claim by using my counterclaim 2, which suggests that while emotional is able to attract audience initially, itself cannot last forever without scientific support. So I will also use human science as AOK and reason as WK. So transparent nature of information and audience independent thinking ability makes pure emotional cannot last be into the shared knowledge forever. So here there's the example about cell phone signal enhancement stickers. So this is the product that's being generated recently and is really good sell in the market. So basically the reason behind this is there's the sticker, and after you put it on the behind your phone signal will be stronger. However, there are a lot of like really exaggerated propaganda about how important the signal is and how useful the product is. But there's no really scientific proof about it. But because the product itself is so hot and a lot of people are buying it, now there is more discussion about whether it is truly useful in the internet. However, after people discuss about it and ask about scientists, they find that no matter for theoretically or practically, the product is not useful at all. So at this point, the personal knowledge, which has already been turned into the public knowledge, being reversed again, and a lot of people reject this product again. And instead of agreeing that the product itself is useful. So for the conclusion, I will say that emotion can be useful for transforming some personal knowledge into the shared knowledge, because firstly, it can connect people's identity and to generate or even amplify a group's belief. And secondly, it can convey ideas in a more simple way without using the complex theories, so people are more easily to accept them. However, there are still limitations of using pure reason to justify one's claim, because firstly, people come from different backgrounds, can really understand certain emotion connections, and secondly, blatant belief fades over time, that once people find out it's not true or there's no reason behind that, they will reject it. So only one reason and scientific proof goes in, with the combined with the emotion, personal knowledge can be effectively transformed into the shared knowledge and being retained. So to link back to the real life situation, yes, here the Greta Thunberg used the really emotional speech, and people who like her or people with the same identity, like teenagers, as well as the environmental activists, will agree her as 100% and feel she is really a girl who speaks out the truth. However, there's still people who has the different identity feel she's just talking about something unrealistic and she's having no scientific proof at all, especially when people finding that she's taking the steam German vessel to the United Nations to do her speech. So the debate is going on everywhere, and about whether her speech and her action is really something good for the environment or not. And that is because she mainly utilized emotion without really thinking about reason behind that. So my final conclusion is that emotion can sometimes be effective, but reason is definitely need to be involved to maintain that shared knowledge. So, for example, we can say that in the Donald Trump and Joe President debate, as I mentioned before,
President Trump is really good of utilizing people's emotion and amplify their anger and fear. However, at this time, we can say that when he is debating with Joe Biden, a lot of people stand for Biden because Biden really points out what's the key issue in today's American society and pointing out some of the strategic solutions for that. And that is what is not being done by the Donald Trump's emotional speech. So, finally, I will say that it's possible to turn in personal knowledge into the shared knowledge, but at this process, we need to involve both emotion and reason. And thank you, that's all.
Questions?
So you mentioned that girl from Switzerland who sings her speeches. Sorry, what's her name?
Greta Thunberg.
So consider her identity, her background. She's just a little 16 years old girl. With no background, no reputation before her speech. Plus, like you mentioned in your speech, she mainly used emotions to convince people. So this identity of her and the strategy of her presentation combined together, it is easy to make an impression of like she's just acting unreasonably. So why do you think she still got all her support from the public?
I think one thing about why she is really standing out and getting a lot of attention is, first I will say she is not have no reputation or have no actual experience before. She even launched a movement which like really multinational, like involved a lot of students from all over the world called FFF. Future for Friday, that movement. But for your question, I think one thing that she really lets a lot of people agree with her is that as a teenager, she stands out. She speaks for the next generation, and she's using such, and strong emotion is definitely one really important part of that. Like because she's not a scientist, but she as a student, she speaks for herself and for our the teenagers who have the same identity with her. So that raised a lot of concerns from the teenager who is maybe not really know about how difficult and what are the barriers between solving the political problem, the economic problem, and balancing the environmental problem. But they do get the feeling that it's something really important for us, and this is something really urgent, and government is doing nothing. So such strong emotional control will allow her audience to feel angry and to feel like discontent toward their governments and letting her to get definitely a lot of support. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Anyone else? I have a short question. How do we know how much reason versus emotion in our belief system?
You mean as someone to accept information or someone to share the information?
Well, I was thinking more of the form to accept, but we can also say to share.
I think that's a really individual thing because everyone has his or her own bias and everyone has different like experience or I'll say education background. Like it's definitely different for a small kids to with the matured adults who have who have seen a lot of different things, have his or her own critical thinking ability. So for example, for a teenager, maybe it's more easy to accept something emotional, especially connect to their own experiences, that it's gonna be really easy for them to accept that thing. However, for someone who thinks more critically, he might or she might need more reason behind that.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you to Audrey. And thank you again for everyone who came. You're also an integral part of it.